Remove those dog tags immediately, Lieutenant. Personal jewelry is not authorized during formal inspection. The words echoed through the pristine corridors of Fort Meridian as 3 senior officers surrounded the young woman standing at rigid attention. Her fingers instinctively moved toward the worn metal tags hanging beneath her dress uniform, but she hesitated. Something in her eyes, a flash of defiance mixed with profound sadness, made even the strictest protocol officer pause. That's when Admiral Harrison Caldwell stepped into the hallway, his weathered face scanning the commotion. His gaze fell upon the dog tags, and more specifically, the unit number etched into the metal. His expression shifted from casual curiosity to stunned recognition. "Sweet Mother of God," he whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. 77th Reconnaissance Battalion, Afghanistan, 2019. The hallway fell silent except for the distant hum of air conditioning. The same unit number that had been classified for 6 years. The same unit that officially never existed. The same unit that had saved his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Meet Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, 26 years old, daughter of Staff Sergeant Carmen Vasquez, a combat medic who had volunteered for 4 consecutive deployments in the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Carmen had been the kind of soldier who ran toward gunfire when others took cover, who carried wounded comrades on her back through enemy territory, who had earned 3 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star before Elena turned 18. But Elena never knew about the Silver Star. Her mother had never mentioned it, just like she'd never mentioned the classified operations, the night raids, or the fact that she'd been handpicked for the military's most elite reconnaissance unit. Carmen had died in a car accident when Elena was 19, leaving behind only a handful of photographs, a worn leather journal filled with medical notes, and those dog tags that Elena had worn every day for 7 years, growing up in the small military town of Copper Ridge, Arizona. Elena had been raised by her grandmother after her mother's death. Carmen had been deployed so frequently that Elena's childhood memories were scattered fragments, brief visits during leave, hurried phone calls from overseas bases, and care packages that arrived weeks late with foreign postmarks. Her grandmother, Maria Vasquez, had been a seamstress who worked double shifts to keep Elena clothed and fed while Carmen sent money home from wherever the military had stationed her. Elena learned early that quiet strength ran in the family bloodline. No complaining, no excuses, just steady determination to honor the uniform and the people who had worn it before her. Despite graduating valedictorian from Copper Ridge High School, despite earning a full ROTC scholarship to the University of Nevada, despite finishing her criminal justice degree with a perfect 4.0 GPA, Elena had never quite fit into the social dynamics of military life. She was too serious for the party crowds, too focused for the casual friendships that formed during training exercises. While other cadets bonded over weekend adventures and shared complaints about difficult instructors, Elena spent her free time in the library studying military history, reading field manuals, and practicing marksmanship until her hands bled. She kept detailed notes in a small notebook that she carried everywhere, analyzing every training scenario, every leadership decision, every tactical mistake that could cost lives in real combat situations. The nickname Ghost had emerged during her 2nd year at the military academy. During a nighttime reconnaissance exercise in the Nevada desert, Elena had managed to complete a 72-hour survival course without being detected by instructors who were specifically hunting for cadets. She'd moved through the terrain with such precision that motion sensors failed to register her presence. Her tracking skills were so advanced that she could follow week-old footprints across rocky ground. Her ability to remain motionless for hours while observing targets was almost supernatural. But the other cadets had turned it into mockery. "Here comes the ghost," they'd whisper when she walked past. "Did you see Ghost talking to herself again? Maybe Ghost should join the CIA instead of the real military." Elena never responded to the taunts, just kept training, kept preparing, kept honoring the memory of a mother she'd barely known, but desperately wanted to make proud. Today was different. Elena was reporting for her first assignment at Fort Meridian, the military's most prestigious intelligence training facility. This was where they separated real intelligence officers from academy graduates who looked good on paper but couldn't handle the psychological pressure of classified operations. The assignment that would determine whether she'd be deployed to active combat zones or stuck behind a desk analyzing satellite photographs for the next 4 years. Elena had been specifically requested for the Advanced Tactical Intelligence program, a selection process so secretive that only 15 officers per year were even invited to apply. The success rate was 12%. The average age of successful candidates was 32. Elena was 26 with 18 months of active duty experience, standing in the marble-floored lobby of Fort Meridian's main administrative building. Elena felt the familiar weight of her mother's dog tags against her chest, the same tags that had been returned to her folded in an American flag after the funeral. The same tags that contained her mother's name, social security number, blood type, and a unit designation that Elena had never bothered to research. She'd worn them as a memorial, not as a military identifier. But now, as senior officers demanded their removal, Elena realized that those tags represented something far more significant than personal remembrance. They represented a legacy she was only beginning to understand. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows as Elena prepared to face the most important evaluation of her military career. She had no idea that within the next few hours, her mother's secret would be revealed, her own potential would be recognized, and the quiet girl with the Ghost nickname would discover that some legacies are too powerful to remain buried forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program housed its candidates in Barracks Delta 7, a converted World War II building that had been modernized with fresh paint and updated electrical systems but still carried the institutional smell of decades of military occupation. Elena's bunk was positioned in the corner, away from the natural social clusters that had formed within hours of arrival. She preferred it that way. While the other candidates bonded over shared complaints about the facility's Spartan conditions and speculation about the upcoming selection process, Elena methodically arranged her personal items with the precision of someone who had learned early that organization was survival. Lieutenant Commander Jackson Reed, 29 years old, had appointed himself the unofficial leader of their training group. Reed came from a family of Navy officers stretching back 3 generations, had graduated from the Naval Academy with honors, and possessed the kind of confident charisma that drew others into his orbit. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the easy smile of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Reed had arrived at Fort Meridian with 3 personal recommendations from admirals: a spotless service record, and the absolute certainty that the Advanced Tactical Intelligence program was simply the next logical step in his predetermined rise through the ranks. "Listen up, people," Reed announced during their first group meal in the mess hall, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I've been talking to some of the senior staff. This program isn't just about individual performance. They're evaluating our ability to function as a cohesive unit under extreme pressure. That means we need to establish clear leadership protocols and communication hierarchies." His eyes swept across the assembled candidates, pausing briefly on Elena before continuing. "I'm proposing that we organize ourselves into strategic partnerships. People with complementary skill sets working together to maximize our collective success rate." The other candidates nodded enthusiastically. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, a communications specialist from Fort Bragg, immediately volunteered to coordinate information sharing between teams. Lieutenant David Chun, a cyber warfare expert, offered to handle any technological challenges they might encounter. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Williams, the oldest candidate at 34, had extensive experience with psychological operations and could provide strategic oversight. Within minutes, Reed had effectively organized the entire group into an informal command structure with himself at the center. Elena continued eating her meal in silence, taking careful notes in her small notebook. She'd observed this exact dynamic during every group training exercise throughout her military career. The loud, confident personalities immediately established dominance, while the quieter, more methodical individuals were relegated to support roles or forgotten entirely. She'd learned to navigate these hierarchies without challenging them directly. Direct confrontation was inefficient and drew unwanted attention. Better to observe, analyze, and prepare for the moments when actual competence would matter more than social positioning. "What about you, Ghost?" Reed's voice cut through her thoughts. The nickname had somehow followed her to Fort Meridian, despite her hopes for a fresh start. "You've been awfully quiet over there. What's your assessment of our team organization?" "Strategy?" Elena looked up from her notebook, meeting Reed's gaze steadily. "I think individual performance will ultimately determine selection outcomes, regardless of group dynamics. But team cohesion is certainly valuable for morale and mutual support." Her response was diplomatic enough to avoid conflict, but non-committal enough to avoid being drawn into Reed's leadership structure. Lieutenant Morrison laughed, a sound that carried just enough edge to be uncomfortable. "That's very philosophical, Elena, but this isn't a college seminar. We're talking about real-world application of tactical intelligence principles. Don't you think practical leadership experience might be more valuable than theoretical analysis?" The subtle dig was carefully crafted. Morrison was referencing Elena's academic background while implying that her lack of combat deployments made her contributions less relevant. It was the kind of professional undermining that Elena had encountered throughout her career, always delivered with a smile and phrased as constructive criticism. "Ghost probably prefers to work alone anyway," added Lieutenant Chen, his tone casual, but his words deliberately exclusionary. "I mean, that's how she got her nickname, right? Always disappearing during group exercises, never participating in team-building activities. Some people just aren't built for collaborative leadership." Elena felt the familiar weight of her mother's dog tags against her chest. Carmen had never mentioned facing this kind of social isolation, but then again, Carmen had never mentioned most aspects of her military service. Elena wondered if her mother had learned to navigate these dynamics, or if she'd simply been too competent for anyone to question her place in the hierarchy. "Well," Reed said with his characteristic diplomatic smile, "everyone has different strengths. Elena, you're obviously very observant. That's definitely valuable in intelligence work. Maybe you could handle some of the background research and documentation tasks, while the rest of us focus on the leadership challenges." The suggestion was phrased as an inclusion, but Elena recognized it as polite dismissal. She was being offered the role of note-taker and researcher while the others positioned themselves for the high-visibility leadership roles that would impress the selection committee. It was the same pattern she'd encountered at the academy. During our OTC training, and in every group evaluation throughout her career, Elena nodded politely and returned to her meal. She'd learned long ago that arguing with group dynamics was pointless. Better to let them underestimate her while she focused on the actual requirements of the program. The Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program wasn't looking for candidates who could manage mess hall politics. They were looking for officers who could operate effectively in hostile environments, where social hierarchies were irrelevant and mission success was the only metric that mattered. As the other candidates continued their strategic planning session, Elena quietly finished her notes and prepared for the first real test of her military career. She had no idea that within days, her mother's secret would transform not just her own understanding of her capabilities, but the entire group's perception of what real intelligence work actually required. The nickname Ghost was about to take on a completely different meaning. The briefing room in Building C-12 had been designed to intimidate. Dark mahogany panels lined the walls, interrupted only by framed photographs of distinguished military leaders and a massive seal of the Department of Defense. The conference table could seat 20 people, but only 15 chairs had been arranged in precise formation. Each chair faced a raised platform where a single podium stood beneath harsh fluorescent lighting. This was where dreams of intelligence careers came to die. Colonel Rebecca Thornfield entered the room at exactly 0800 hours, her footsteps echoing against the polished concrete floor. At 52 years old, Thornfield commanded respect through her mere presence. She had served 3 combat tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and had been personally responsible for intelligence operations that had prevented dozens of terrorist attacks on American soil. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, so tight it seemed to stretch her already severe features. Her uniform displayed ribbons and commendations that most officers could only dream of earning. When she spoke, even seasoned veterans listened. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thornfield began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. "Welcome to the most demanding selection process in the United States military. The Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program exists to identify officers capable of operating in environments where failure results in American casualties. Over the next 72 hours, you will face scenarios designed to break your psychological defenses, challenge your analytical capabilities, and test your ability to make critical decisions under extreme duress." She paused, allowing her words to settle over the assembled candidates. Elena noticed that several officers had unconsciously straightened in their chairs. Lieutenant Reed maintained his confident posture, but she detected a slight tension in his jaw that hadn't been there moments earlier. "The statistics are not encouraging," Thornfield continued, consulting a manila folder that contained their collective fates. "In the program's 12-year history, we have evaluated 437 candidates. 68 have successfully completed the selection process. Of those 68, 41 are currently deployed in classified operations worldwide. 14 have been killed in action. 7 have suffered psychological breakdowns requiring medical discharge. The remaining 6 have been reassigned to desk positions after proving unable to handle field operations." Elena felt the familiar weight of her mother's dog tags against her chest. She wondered if Carmen had sat in a similar briefing room, listening to similar statistics, making similar calculations about her chances of survival. The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. "Your first evaluation begins immediately," Thornfield announced, gesturing toward a series of numbered envelopes on the conference table. "The Singleton Protocol. Each of you will be assigned an individual scenario requiring you to analyze a complex intelligence situation and provide actionable recommendations. You will have no access to reference materials, no communication with other candidates, and no second chances. The scenarios are based on real-world operations where American lives hung in the balance." Lieutenant Commander Reed raised his hand with characteristic confidence. "Ma'am, will we have access to our teams for consultation?" "During our pre-briefing discussions, we established strategic partnerships that could enhance our collective analytical capabilities." Thornfield's expression didn't change, but Elena detected a slight narrowing of her eyes that suggested displeasure. "Lieutenant Commander, the word singleton refers to an individual operating without support. In the field, intelligence officers frequently work alone, in hostile territory, with no backup and no safety net. Your ability to form study groups is irrelevant when you're analyzing intercepted communications from a safe house in Syria, while enemy forces search for your location. The room fell silent. Reed's confident smile flickered for just a moment, before returning to full strength. Of course, ma'am. I was simply clarifying the parameters. The parameters are simple, Thornfield replied. You will be assigned to individual isolation rooms. You will have 6 hours to analyze your scenario and present your findings to a panel of senior intelligence officers. The scenarios are classified at the secret level and above. Any breach of security protocols will result in immediate dismissal and potential criminal prosecution. She began walking down the row of candidates, placing sealed envelopes in front of each chair. Elena watched her approach, noting the deliberate pace, the careful attention to each candidate's reaction. This wasn't just about distributing assignments. Thornfield was conducting her own preliminary assessment, observing how each officer handled the building pressure. Scenario Alpha 7, Thornfield said, placing Elena's envelope directly in front of her. Transportation to your isolation room begins in 5 minutes. You are not permitted to discuss your assignments with other candidates, either during the evaluation period or afterward. Any attempt to collaborate or share information will result in the immediate dismissal of all parties involved. Elena glanced at the envelope containing her fate. The paper was thick, official, with multiple security stamps and classification markings. Whatever lay inside represented years of preparation condensed into a single test of her analytical capabilities. She thought about her mother's journal, filled with medical notes and tactical observations that Elena had never fully understood. Carmen had faced similar moments of truth, similar tests that determined whether she was worthy of the uniform she wore. One final point, Thornfield said, returning to the podium. The scenarios you will analyze are not hypothetical exercises. They are based on actual intelligence operations conducted within the last 5 years. The recommendations you provide will be evaluated against the real-world decisions made by experienced intelligence officers in the field. In some cases, those decisions saved American lives. In others, they resulted in mission failure and casualties. The weight of responsibility settled over the room like a physical presence. These weren't academic exercises or training simulations. They were dealing with life and death situations that had actually occurred, where real people had lived or died, based on the quality of intelligence analysis. Gentlemen, ma'am, Thornfield concluded, the scenarios range from hostage rescue operations to preventing weapons of mass destruction from reaching terrorist organizations. Some of you will analyze communications intercepts that led to successful raids. Others will examine intelligence failures that resulted in American deaths. The pressure you feel right now is nothing compared to what intelligence officers experience in the field. If you cannot handle the stress of this evaluation, you have no business in tactical intelligence. Elena picked up her envelope, feeling the weight of paper that could determine her entire future. As the candidates filed out toward their individual isolation rooms, she caught a glimpse of Lieutenant Reed's envelope marked Scenario Delta 3 and Lieutenant Morrison's marked Scenario Bravo 9. Each officer would face their demons alone, with only their training, intuition, and analytical skills to guide them through scenarios where the wrong decision had once meant death. The selection process had officially begun, and Elena was about to discover whether the quiet girl with the ghost nickname possessed the same steel that had carried her mother through classified operations she'd never been allowed to discuss. Elena's isolation room was a windowless concrete cube, 8 feet by 10 feet, containing nothing but a metal desk, a single chair, and a fluorescent light that hummed with electrical interference. The walls were painted institutional beige, the kind of color that seemed designed to drain hope from anyone forced to stare at it for extended periods. A single ventilation grate provided barely adequate airflow, and the temperature had been deliberately set 3 degrees too cold to ensure discomfort without causing hypothermia. She placed her sealed envelope on the desk and checked her watch. 815 hours. 6 hours until her presentation to the evaluation panel. 6 hours to prove that the quiet girl with the ghost nickname deserved a place among America's elite intelligence officers. 6 hours to honor a mother whose service record she was only beginning to understand. Elena broke the security seal and opened Scenario Alpha 7. The first page contained a stark warning printed in red letters. Classified, secret, Nafran. Unauthorized disclosure subject to criminal prosecution. Below that, a mission briefing that made her blood run cold. The scenario involved a kidnapped American diplomat in Somalia, held by a terrorist organization demanding the release of captured fighters in exchange for his life. Intelligence intercepts suggested the diplomat was being moved between safe houses every 48 hours to avoid rescue operations. Elena's task was to analyze fragmentary intelligence reports, intercepted communications, and surveillance data to determine the most likely location for a rescue attempt. The wrong recommendation would result in either a failed mission or the diplomat's execution, but this wasn't a hypothetical exercise. The briefing materials included actual photographs of Ambassador Timothy Richardson, a career diplomat with 3 children and a pregnant wife. Real intercepts from NSA surveillance. Real satellite imagery showing potential safe house locations across Mogadishu. Real intelligence that had once determined whether an American citizen lived or died. Elena spread the materials across her desk with methodical precision. 43 pages of intercepted phone conversations in Somali and Arabic, complete with English translations. 16 satellite photographs showing suspected safe house locations. 7 pages of biographical information on known terrorist operatives in the region. 3 maps detailing Mogadishu's street layout, checkpoint locations, and known terrorist strongholds. And a single page containing the mission parameters. Recommend the optimal target for a special operations rescue mission, with supporting analysis justifying the selection. She began with the intercepted communications, reading each conversation multiple times to identify patterns, code words, and operational indicators. The terrorists were using a mixture of coded language and Arabic religious terminology to discuss their operations. References to the package clearly meant the diplomat. Mentions of moving the merchandise indicated location changes. But the linguistic patterns were complex, layered with cultural references that required deep understanding of Somali clan dynamics and Islamic theological concepts. Elena pulled out her small notebook and began constructing a timeline of communications. The terrorists had made 17 phone calls over a 6-day period. Each call provided fragments of information about their operations, but the challenge was synthesizing those fragments into actionable intelligence. She noticed subtle variations in background noise during different calls, street traffic, construction sounds, religious music from nearby mosques. These audio signatures could help determine the geographic locations where calls were made. 3 hours into her analysis, Elena discovered something the briefing materials hadn't explicitly highlighted. The terrorist leader, identified as Hassan al-Barakat, had a distinctive speech pattern. He consistently used specific Quranic verses when discussing operational security, but the verses weren't random. They corresponded to geographical landmarks in Mogadishu that had religious significance. Al-Barakat was embedding location information directly into his religious rhetoric, using a code system that would be invisible to intelligence analysts unfamiliar with both Islamic theology and Somali urban geography. Elena cross-referenced the Quranic verses with the satellite imagery and street maps. Verse 2 to 125 reference the sacred house and walking around it, potentially indicating a location near Mogadishu's central mosque. Verse 940 mentioned caves and divine assistance, possibly referring to the underground tunnel system near the old port district. Verse 17-1 described a night journey from the sacred mosque to the distant mosque, likely indicating movement between specific neighborhoods with historical religious significance. But there was more. The background audio in the intercepted calls revealed a pattern that suggested the terrorists were operating from a location near both vehicular traffic and construction activity. Only 3 of the suspected safe houses met those criteria. When combined with the religious geographical references, only one location satisfied all the intelligence indicators, a compound in the Hamar Wayne district, approximately 400 meters from the Arba Rukun Mosque, adjacent to a construction site for a new commercial building. Elena checked her watch. 12:30 hours. 3.5 hours remaining. She had identified the most likely target location, but her analysis needed to address potential complications. The compound was surrounded by civilian housing, making a direct assault extremely dangerous for non-combatants. The narrow streets would limit vehicle access for extraction. The proximity to the mosque meant the rescue operation could be perceived as an attack on a religious site, potentially causing widespread civilian unrest. Her recommendation would need to balance operational feasibility with political consequences. A successful rescue that resulted in civilian casualties or religious desecration could create long-term diplomatic problems that outweighed the immediate objective of saving one American life. But failing to recommend action could result in the diplomat's execution. Elena began drafting her final report, structuring her analysis to address both tactical and strategic considerations. She recommended the Hamar Wayne compound as the primary target, but suggested a coordinated operation that included psychological warfare specialists to minimize civilian panic and religious affairs officers to address potential cultural sensitivity issues. Her plan called for a dawn assault when foot traffic would be minimal, combined with diversionary operations at secondary locations to confuse terrorist communications. As she wrote her final conclusions, Elena felt the familiar weight of her mother's dog tags against her chest. She wondered if Carmen had faced similar decisions during her classified operations, weighing American lives against operational risks, making recommendations that could result in mission success or catastrophic failure. The responsibility was overwhelming, but Elena had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. At 14:15 hours, exactly 6 hours after receiving her assignment, Elena sealed her completed analysis in the provided security envelope. Her recommendations were thorough, justified, and actionable. Whether they were correct would be determined by intelligence officers who had faced these same impossible decisions in real-world operations where American lives hung in the balance. The ghost was about to discover whether she possessed the analytical steel that separated real intelligence officers from those who looked good on paper but crumbled under pressure. The presentation room felt like a courtroom designed for military tribunals. 5 senior officers sat behind a curved table elevated 18 inches above the floor, their faces illuminated by harsh overhead lighting that cast dramatic shadows across their weathered features. Each officer represented a different branch of military intelligence: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and the Defense Intelligence Agency. They had collectively overseen intelligence operations in every major conflict zone of the past 2 decades. Their combined experience included successful missions that had prevented terrorist attacks, rescued hostages, and eliminated high-value targets. They had also presided over intelligence failures that resulted in American casualties, blown operations, and diplomatic disasters. Elena entered the room at exactly 14:30 hours, carrying her sealed analysis in a manila folder marked with her candidate number, Alpha 7. The presentation podium stood directly beneath a spotlight that would illuminate every facial expression, every nervous gesture, every sign of confidence or uncertainty. Behind the podium, A large screen displayed the official seal of the Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program, surrounded by the motto, "In shadows truth, in truth victory." Colonel Thornfield occupied the center position at the evaluation table, flanked by 4 officers whose nameplates identified them as masters of their respective intelligence disciplines. To her left sat Commander Victoria Hayes, Naval Intelligence, whose expertise in maritime counterterrorism had earned her 3 Navy Commendation Medals. Next to Hayes was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, Air Force Intelligence, a specialist in signals intercepts whose work had directly contributed to the elimination of 7 terrorist cells across the Middle East. On Uzbaz, Thornfield's right sat Major General Patricia Reeves, Defense Intelligence Agency, whose strategic analysis had shaped American foreign policy in 3 different administrations. The final evaluator was Brigadier General Samuel Cortez, Marine Corps Intelligence, a legend in human intelligence operations who had personally run assets in every major conflict zone since the Gulf War. But there was a 6th chair at the evaluation table, currently empty, with a nameplate that simply read Observer. Elena wondered who rated such mysterious billing at the most important presentation of her military career. "Lieutenant Vasquez," Colonel Thornfield began, consulting the evaluation folder that contained Elena's complete service record. "You have been assigned Scenario Alpha 7, the Somalia hostage rescue analysis. You have 15 minutes to present your findings and recommendations to this panel. Your presentation will be followed by a 10-minute question period, during which these officers will challenge your analysis, test your assumptions, and evaluate your ability to defend your conclusions under pressure." Elena approached the podium, placed her folder on the lectern, and looked directly at each evaluator before beginning. She had learned during public speaking training that maintaining eye contact projected confidence, even when facing officers whose combined rank could fill a small Pentagon office building. "Honorable members of the evaluation panel," Elena began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Scenario Alpha 7 presents a complex hostage rescue situation, requiring analysis of fragmentary intelligence to determine optimal target selection. Based on my analysis of intercepted communications, satellite imagery, and operational parameters, I recommend immediate action against a compound in Mogadishu's Hamar Wayne district." She had barely finished her opening statement when the door at the rear of the presentation room opened quietly. Elena's peripheral vision caught movement, but military protocol required her to maintain focus on the evaluation panel rather than acknowledging late arrivals. However, she noticed that all 5 evaluators had shifted their attention toward the newcomer, their expressions showing the mixture of surprise and deference that suggested someone of significant importance had entered the room. Elena continued her presentation, methodically explaining her analysis of the intercepted communications, the linguistic patterns she had identified, and the religious geographical coding system that had revealed the terrorists' location. She detailed her timeline of movements, her assessment of the compound's vulnerability, and her recommendations for minimizing civilian casualties during the rescue operation. "The key breakthrough in my analysis," Elena explained, advancing to her final slide, "was recognizing that the terrorist leader, Hassan al-Barakat, was embedding operational information within Quranic verses during his communications. By cross-referencing the specific verses with geographical landmarks in Mogadishu, I was able to triangulate their most likely operational base." Major General Reeves leaned forward with obvious interest. "Lieutenant, your analysis suggests a level of cultural and linguistic expertise that exceeds standard intelligence training. How did you develop familiarity with Islamic theological geography in the context of Somali urban planning?" Elena paused, considering her response carefully. The truth was that she had spent 3 years studying Middle Eastern languages and culture during her undergraduate degree, driven by a desire to understand the regions where her mother had served. But she also knew that admitting to extensive, self-directed study might sound like she was trying to impress the panel with irrelevant academic credentials. "Ma'am, I pursued additional language and cultural studies during my undergraduate program, focusing on regions where American military personnel are most likely to encounter complex operational environments. I believe that understanding local, cultural context would enhance my effectiveness as an intelligence officer." Commander Hayes consulted her evaluation notes. "Your recommended operational plan addresses tactical considerations, but what about the broader strategic implications? A rescue operation in Somalia could have diplomatic ramifications that extend far beyond the immediate mission objectives." Elena had anticipated this question. "Ma'am, my analysis includes recommendations for psychological operations and cultural liaison coordination specifically to address those concerns. The operation should be conducted in coordination with religious affairs specialists and local community leaders to minimize the perception of religious or cultural disrespect." Brigadier General Cortez spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally executed similar operations in hostile territory. "Lieutenant, your analysis is thorough and well-reasoned. But intelligence work isn't conducted in academic isolation. In the field, you would have incomplete information, time pressure, and lives hanging in the balance. How do you handle uncertainty when perfect analysis isn't possible?" The question struck at the heart of intelligence work. Elena knew that her careful, methodical approach was both her greatest strength and potentially her greatest weakness. In real operations, intelligence officers often had to make life-and-death recommendations based on fragmentary information and gut instinct. "Sir, uncertainty is inherent in intelligence operations. But uncertainty shouldn't paralyze decision-making. My approach is to identify the highest probability scenarios based on available evidence, while building contingency plans that account for the most likely alternative outcomes. Perfect information is rarely available, but systematic analysis can minimize the probability of catastrophic errors." As Elena finished her response, she noticed that the mysterious observer in the sixth chair had been taking extensive notes. Throughout her presentation, the individual's nameplate remained face down, but their body language suggested focused attention and professional interest rather than casual observation. Colonel Thornfield glanced at her watch. "Lieutenant Vasquez, you have used 13 minutes of your allocated presentation time. Do you have any final comments before we proceed to the question period?" Elena looked directly at each evaluator before responding. "Ma'am, intelligence analysis is ultimately about saving American lives and protecting national security interests. My analysis of Scenario Alpha 7 reflects my commitment to providing accurate, actionable intelligence that enables successful mission outcomes, while minimizing unnecessary risks to both military personnel and civilian populations." The presentation phase was complete. Now came the real test, defending her analysis against challenges from 5 of the most experienced intelligence officers in the American military. The questioning period began with surgical precision. Major General Reeves opened with a scenario that would have challenged intelligence analysts with a decade of field experience. "Lieutenant Vasquez, assume your recommended compound is actually a decoy location. The terrorists have discovered our surveillance capabilities and are feeding U.S. false information through their communications. How would you adapt your analysis, and what backup targets would you recommend?" Elena felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. "Ma'am, deception operations are a constant threat in intelligence analysis. My secondary analysis identified 3 alternative locations based on different intelligence indicators. If the primary target proves to be a decoy, I would recommend surveillance of a compound near the Bakara market, which showed consistent vehicular patterns during non-communication periods, suggesting genuine operational activity rather than stage deception." Brigadier General Cortez leaned back in his chair, his weathered face showing the skepticism of someone who had seen countless young officers crumble under real-world pressure. That's a textbook response, Lieutenant. But in Somalia, textbook responses get people killed. I've run operations in Mogadishu. The city is a maze of clan territories, shifting alliances, and tribal warfare that your satellite imagery doesn't capture. How do you account for local political dynamics that could compromise your entire operation? The question revealed the gap between academic analysis and operational reality. Elena had studied Somali clan structures during her undergraduate research, but Cortez was testing whether she understood the street-level complexities that determined mission success or failure in Africa. Sir, clan dynamics would require coordination with local assets and tribal liaison officers. The Hamar Wayne district is primarily controlled by the Hawaii clan, but the specific sub-clan territories shift based on ongoing disputes. My operational recommendation includes a requirement for current human intelligence from local sources to verify tribal boundaries and identify potential safe passage routes. Commander Hayes consulted her notes, then looked up with the intense focus of someone preparing to demolish a carefully constructed argument. Lieutenant, your analysis relies heavily on religious geographical coding. That's innovative thinking, but it's also speculation. What if you're wrong? What if Hassan al-Barakat wasn't using coded religious references, but was simply expressing genuine religious sentiment during stressful communications? The challenge struck at the foundation of Elena's entire analysis. If her interpretation of the Quranic references was incorrect, her target recommendation could be completely wrong. Elena had anticipated this exact criticism during her 6 hours of analysis, and she had prepared evidence to support her conclusion. Ma'am, I considered that possibility during my analysis. However, al-Barakat used 17 different Quranic verses across 6 days of communications. Statistical analysis shows that the probability of those specific verses correlating with geographical landmarks by random chance is less than 2%. Additionally, the verses were consistently used in conjunction with operational terminology, suggesting intentional coding rather than spontaneous religious expression. Lieutenant Colonel Webb had remained silent throughout the questioning, taking extensive notes while his colleagues challenged Ellen's analysis. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the technical precision of signals intelligence specialists who dealt with intercepted communications as their primary source of actionable intelligence. Lieutenant, your linguistic analysis demonstrates impressive attention to detail. But you've based your entire recommendation on communications intercepts that might be compromised. NSS signals intelligence has a dirty secret. Sometimes we intercept exactly what the enemy wants us to hear. How do you validate the authenticity of intercepted communications in a hostile environment where deception operations are standard practice? Elena paused, recognizing that Webb had identified the fundamental vulnerability in signals-based intelligence analysis. Every piece of intercepted communication could potentially be part of an elaborate deception operation designed to misdirect American intelligence efforts. Sir, communication authentication requires cross-referencing multiple intelligence streams. In this scenario, I correlated the intercepted communications with satellite imagery showing movement patterns around the suspected locations. The vehicular activity and personnel movements visible in the satellite data supported the communication patterns, suggesting authentic rather than manufactured intelligence. But Webb wasn't finished. Satellite imagery can be deceived too, Lieutenant. Professional terrorist organizations understand our surveillance capabilities. They can stage vehicular movements and personnel activity to support false communications. You're building conclusions on top of potentially compromised foundations. Elena felt the weight of the challenge. Webb was systematically dismantling every pillar of her analysis, forcing her to defend conclusions that suddenly seemed less certain than they had during her 6 hours of isolated study. But she had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of analytical pressure. Sir, you're absolutely correct that individual intelligence streams can be compromised. That's why my analysis incorporates what I call convergent validation, the religious geographical coding, the vehicular patterns, the communication timing, and the background audio signatures all point toward the same conclusion through completely different analytical pathways. The probability that terrorists could successfully deceive all 4 intelligence streams simultaneously is significantly lower than the probability that my analysis accurately reflects their genuine operations. The mysterious observer in the 6th chair had been taking notes throughout the entire questioning period, but now looked up with obvious interest. Elena noticed that the observer's body language had shifted from passive documentation to active engagement, suggesting that something in her responses had captured their attention. Colonel Thornfield glanced at the observer, then returned her focus to Elena. Lieutenant, one final question from the panel. Intelligence analysis isn't just about being correct. It's about being useful. Your recommendation calls for a complex multi-phase operation involving special operations forces, psychological warfare specialists, religious affairs officers, and tribal liaison personnel. In a real crisis situation, that level of coordination might not be feasible. How do you balance analytical perfection with operational practicality? Elena recognized this as the ultimate test of intelligence work, the ability to provide recommendations that were both accurate and actionable within real-world constraints. Academic analysis was worthless if it couldn't be implemented by military commanders operating under time pressure and resource limitations. Ma'am, intelligence analysis serves operational commanders, not academic standards. If my recommended approach is too complex for immediate implementation, I would provide a simplified alternative, a direct assault on the primary target with minimal coordination requirements, while acknowledging the increased risks of both mission personnel and civilian populations. The intelligence analyst's responsibility is to present commanders with options, not to make operational decisions beyond their expertise. The questioning period ended with Colonel Thornfield consulting her watch and nodding toward the other evaluators. Lieutenant Vasquez, thank you for your presentation. You will be notified of the evaluation results within 72 hours. Please remain available for additional questioning if required. As Elena gathered her materials and prepared to leave, she caught the observer finally turning over their nameplate. The name that appeared made her breath catch in her throat. Admiral Harrison Caldwell, Director of Naval Intelligence. The same admiral who had stopped the hallway confrontation about her dog tags less than 24 hours earlier. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Elena saw something in Admiral Caldwell's expression that she couldn't quite interpret. Recognition, certainly, but also something that looked remarkably like anticipation. Admiral Harrison Caldwell had been watching Elena Vasquez for longer than she realized. Not in an official capacity, not through formal intelligence channels, but through the careful attention of someone who recognized patterns that others missed. At 62 years old, Caldwell had overseen naval intelligence operations across 4 different theaters of conflict, had briefed 3 presidents on matters of national security, and possessed the rare ability to identify exceptional talent before it became obvious to others. But his interest in Elena went beyond professional assessment. It was personal, rooted in events that had occurred 7 years earlier in the mountains of Afghanistan. The connection began with a routine intelligence briefing in January 2019. Caldwell, then serving as Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, had been reviewing after-action reports from joint operations conducted by the 77th Reconnaissance Battalion, an elite unit that officially didn't exist in any organizational chart or budget document. The 77th operated in the shadows between conventional military operations and classified special activities, conducting intelligence-gathering missions in environments too dangerous for traditional forces. Staff Sergeant Carmen Vasquez had been the 77th's senior medical specialist, but her role extended far beyond treating combat injuries. In the specialized world of reconnaissance operations, medics often served as the primary interface with local populations, building trust through medical assistance while gathering critical intelligence about enemy movements, local political dynamics, and potential threats to American personnel. Carmen had possessed an unusual combination of medical expertise, cultural sensitivity, and analytical intelligence that made her invaluable in complex operational environments. The after-action report that caught Caldwell's attention described Operation Nightingale, a reconnaissance mission in Afghanistan's Kunar province designed to identify Taliban leadership structures and weapons caches. The operation had been compromised when local informants provided false intelligence, leading the reconnaissance team into a carefully orchestrated ambush. 6 American personnel had been trapped in a remote valley with limited ammunition, no vehicle support, and enemy forces controlling all primary exit routes. Standard protocol called for immediate extraction using helicopter support, but winter weather conditions made helicopter operations impossible for at least 18 hours. The reconnaissance team faced a choice between attempting to fight their way out against overwhelming odds or finding an alternative escape route through terrain that local guides insisted was impassable during winter months. Carmen Vasquez had made a recommendation that saved 6 American lives and changed Caldwell's understanding of what exceptional intelligence analysis looked like in practice. Instead of focusing on military solutions, she had analyzed the cultural and religious patterns of local tribal movements. The Kunar province contained ancient pilgrimage routes used by local tribes for centuries, paths that avoided main valleys and enemy strongholds because they had been designed for spiritual rather than military purposes. Using her medical interactions with local villagers, Carmen had identified a network of traditional routes that connected remote villages through mountain passes that didn't appear on any military maps. More importantly, she had recognized that certain routes were considered sacred by local tribes, meaning Taliban forces would avoid using them for military operations out of respect for religious traditions. Her analysis had enabled the reconnaissance team to move 15 miles through enemy territory without detection, following pilgrimage paths that were invisible to both satellite surveillance and enemy patrols. The team had not only escaped the ambush, but had gathered intelligence about Taliban supply routes that led to 3 successful interdiction operations over the following months. But Carmen's contribution to Operation Nightingale went beyond route analysis. During their movement through the mountain passes, she had documented evidence of a sophisticated Taliban intelligence network that was tracking American operations through compromised local informants. Her detailed observations about communication patterns, meeting locations, and personnel movements had enabled military intelligence to identify and neutralize a spy network that had been feeding information to Taliban forces for over 8 months. Caldwell had personally reviewed Carmen's intelligence reports and had been astonished by the quality of her analysis. She wrote with the precision of a trained intelligence officer, demonstrated cultural understanding that exceeded most regional specialists, and possessed an intuitive grasp of operational security that reflected years of experience in hostile environments. Her reports contained insights that had directly influenced strategic planning for subsequent operations throughout the region. The 77th Reconnaissance Battalion had recommended Carmen for the Silver Star based on her contributions to Operation Nightingale and 2 other classified missions, where her intelligence analysis had prevented American casualties. The recommendation had been approved through channels that Caldwell monitored as part of his intelligence oversight responsibilities. But Carmen had never received the medal. She had been killed in a car accident 3 weeks before the award ceremony, leaving behind a teenage daughter who had no idea of her mother's contributions to American national security. Caldwell had attended Carmen's funeral, standing in the back of the chapel at Arlington National Cemetery, while her daughter received the folded flag that covered her mother's casket. He had watched 19-year-old Elena Vasquez stand with stoic dignity while military honors were rendered for a mother whose true service could never be publicly acknowledged. The funeral program listed Carmen as a combat medic, with no mention of the 77th Reconnaissance Battalion, Operation Nightingale, or the intelligence work that had saved American lives in Afghanistan's most dangerous provinces. Now, 7 years later, Caldwell was watching Carmen's daughter demonstrate the same analytical brilliance that had made her mother invaluable to classified operations. Elena's presentation had shown not just technical competence but the kind of innovative thinking that separated exceptional intelligence officers from those who followed established procedures. Her analysis of religious geographical coding reflected the same cultural intuition that had enabled Carmen to identify sacred pilgrimage routes through enemy territory. During Elena's questioning period, Caldwell had recognized something that the other evaluators missed. When challenged about authentication and deception operations, Elena hadn't simply defended her analysis with technical arguments. She had demonstrated the kind of convergent analytical thinking that enabled intelligence officers to operate effectively in environments where single-source intelligence was inherently unreliable. That approach couldn't be taught through classroom instruction or simulation exercises. It developed through either extensive field experience or exceptional analytical intuition. Elena possessed the same intuitive understanding of intelligence, work that had made her mother legendary within the classified community. But more than that, she had refined and enhanced those natural abilities through years of dedicated study and preparation. Where Carmen had relied primarily on field experience and cultural observation, Elena had added statistical analysis, linguistic expertise, and systematic methodology that amplified her natural talents. As Elena left the presentation room, Caldwell understood that he was witnessing the emergence of an intelligence officer who could exceed even her mother's contributions to national security. But Elena had no idea of the legacy she was continuing, no knowledge of the classified operations that had established her family's reputation within the intelligence community, and no understanding of why Admiral Harrison Caldwell had taken such personal interest in her career development. The 77th Reconnaissance Battalion's after-action reports remained classified, but Elena's performance during the Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program evaluation had convinced Caldwell that it was time for certain secrets to be revealed. Carmen Vasquez's daughter deserved to know the truth about her mother's service, and the intelligence community deserved to recognize the potential of the young officer who carried those dog tags as both memorial and inheritance. Elena had barely slept during the 48 hours following her presentation. She'd replayed every question, analyzed every facial expression from the evaluation panel, and calculated the probability of success based on her performance. The isolation was maddening. Fort Meridian's regulations prohibited candidates from discussing their evaluations with other personnel, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and mounting anxiety about her future. The summons came at 630 hours. On Thursday morning, a crisp knock on her barracks door, followed by a sealed envelope marked Urgent Eyes Only LTE Vasquez. Inside, a single page with Admiral Caldwell's official letterhead, Report to Building A1, Conference Room 7:08:00 hours. Come alone. Bring your mother's dog tags. The final instruction made Elena's pulse quicken. Admiral Caldwell's interest in her mother's dog tags during the hallway incident had seemed like casual military curiosity, but requesting them specifically for a private meeting suggested something far more significant. Elena carefully removed the tags from around her neck, studying them for details she might have missed during 7 years of daily wear. Her mother's name, social security number, blood type, and religious preference were standard military identification. But the unit designation, 77th RCNBTN, had always seemed oddly abbreviated compared to other military unit identifications she'd encountered. Building. A-1 housed Fort Meridian's most sensitive administrative functions. The conference room occupied. The building's secure wing, accessible only through multiple security checkpoints and biometric scanners. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, as military protocol demanded, and was escorted through corridors lined with photographs of distinguished intelligence officers whose operations had shaped American foreign policy for decades. Admiral Caldwell was waiting alone in Conference Room 7, a windowless space designed for classified discussions. The table contained 2 chairs, a secure telephone, and a manila folder marked with classification. Stamps that Elena couldn't read from her position. Caldwell stood when she entered, his weathered face showing the gravity of someone preparing to share information that would fundamentally change another person's understanding of their family history. However, Thornfield continued, and Elena felt her stomach drop at the inevitable qualifier that preceded most military rejections. The panel had significant concerns about your ability to operate effectively in team environments. Several evaluators noted that your analytical approach, while thorough, demonstrated a preference for individual work that might not translate effectively to collaborative operations, where multiple officers must coordinate intelligence analysis under extreme time pressure. Elena's heart sank. Despite her successful analysis, despite demonstrating capabilities that had impressed seasoned intelligence officers, she was being rejected for social dynamics that had nothing to do with her actual analytical abilities. The same pattern that had defined her entire military career was repeating at the moment when it mattered most. Furthermore, Thornfield added, your background lacks the combat experience that typically characterizes successful tactical intelligence. Officers. The evaluation panel questioned whether an officer without deployment experience could provide reliable intelligence support for high-risk operations where incorrect analysis results in American casualties. Elena felt the familiar weight of her mother's dog tags against her chest, but now they carried different significance. Carmen Vasquez had operated in the most dangerous environments imaginable, had saved American lives through intelligence analysis, conducted under conditions that would have broken most trained officers. Elena carried that legacy in her DNA, in her analytical approach, and in her commitment to protecting American interests, regardless of personal recognition. Ma'am, Elena said quietly, I understand the panel's concerns about my experience level. But tactical intelligence analysis isn't about personal combat experience. It's about systematic evaluation of available information to provide actionable recommendations for operational commanders. My analysis of Scenario Alpha 7 demonstrated my ability to synthesize complex intelligence streams into coherent operational plans regardless of my deployment history. Thornfield studied Elena for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Lieutenant, that response demonstrates exactly the kind of confidence that the evaluation panel found both impressive and concerning. You defended your analysis effectively under intense questioning, but you also showed a tendency toward individual decision-making that might not serve you well in collaborative environments. Elena realized that she was being criticized for the same analytical independence that had enabled her to solve the Somalia scenario when other candidates had likely followed more conventional approaches. Her methodical, systematic thinking was being characterized as antisocial behavior rather than professional competence. However, Thornfield said, and Elena detected a slight shift in her tone, there are circumstances that have influenced the final evaluation decision. Admiral Caldwell has provided additional context, regarding your family background and analytical capabilities that wasn't available during the standard selection process. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Admiral Caldwell's revelation about her mother's service with the 77th Reconnaissance Battalion had obviously been shared with the evaluation panel, potentially changing their assessment of her qualifications for tactical intelligence work. The panel has decided to recommend you for acceptance into the Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program, Thornfield announced, with the understanding that your first assignment will include additional mentorship and collaborative training to address the concerns about your team integration capabilities. Elena felt a rush of relief so intense that she had to concentrate on maintaining military composure. After years of preparation, months of anticipation, and days of agonizing uncertainty, she had achieved the goal that would determine the trajectory of her entire military career. Ma'am, thank you for this opportunity. I won't disappoint the panel's confidence in my abilities. Lieutenant, Thornfield said, her stern expression softening slightly, you should understand that this acceptance comes with expectations that exceed those for typical program graduates. Admiral Caldwell has specifically requested that you be assigned to operations requiring the kind of cultural analysis and systematic intelligence evaluation that characterized your mother's service with classified units. Elena understood the implication. She wasn't just being accepted into the Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program. She was being prepared to continue her mother's work with the 77th Reconnaissance Battalion or similar classified operations where CONVENTIONL intelligence analysis wasn't sufficient for mission success. Your first assignment, Thornfield continued, will be with the Joint Intelligence Operations Center at MacDill Air Force Base, working directly with Special Operations Command on intelligence analysis for sensitive missions. The assignment begins in 30 days, which will give you time to complete additional security, clearance processing and specialized training in cultural intelligence analysis. Elena's mind raced with the implications. MacDill Air Force Base housed the headquarters for Special Operations Command, the military organization responsible for the most sensitive and dangerous missions conducted by American forces worldwide. Assignment to SOCOM intelligence operations represented the pinnacle of tactical intelligence careers, the kind of position that most officers spent decades hoping to achieve. Lieutenant, Thornfield said, standing to indicate the conclusion of their meeting, your mother would be proud of the officer you've become. The intelligence community needs officers with your analytical capabilities and your family's commitment to protecting American interests. Don't waste this opportunity. As Elena stood and prepared to leave, she realized that her acceptance into the Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program represented more than personal achievement. She was being entrusted with continuing a legacy of service that had begun with her mother's classified operations and would now extend through her own contributions to American national security. 3 weeks after her acceptance into the Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program, Elena received a package that would forever change her understanding of her family's legacy. The package arrived through classified mail channels, bearing Admiral Caldwell's personal authorization and security markings that indicated contents far beyond her current clearance level. Inside, she found her mother's complete service record from the 77th Reconnaissance Battalion, including operational reports, intelligence assessments, and personal recommendations that had remained classified for 7 years. Elena spread the documents across her temporary quarters desk, creating a chronological timeline of her mother's true military career. What emerged was a portrait of a woman whose intelligence capabilities had shaped American operations across 3 different theaters of conflict, whose analytical insights had prevented terrorist attacks, and whose innovative approaches to cultural intelligence had been incorporated into military doctrine at the highest levels of classification. The first revelation concerned Operation Silent Thunder, conducted in Iraq's Anbar province during 2015. Carmen had been embedded with a reconnaissance team, tasked with identifying high-value targets within a complex urban environment where traditional surveillance methods had proven ineffective. Local population was hostile to American presence, making human intelligence gathering extremely dangerous for military personnel who couldn't blend into the cultural landscape. Carmen's approach had been revolutionary. Instead of attempting to gather intelligence through traditional interrogation or surveillance methods, she had analyzed patterns of medical need within the local population. By tracking requests for specific medications, treatment for particular injuries, and seasonal variations in health concerns, she had identified which households contained individuals likely to be involved in insurgent activities. The methodology was brilliant in its simplicity. Insurgents involved in weapons manufacturing showed consistent patterns of chemical burns and respiratory problems. Bomb makers developed specific types of hand injuries from handling explosive materials. Communications specialists suffered from eye strain and vitamin deficiencies associated with extended computer use in poor lighting conditions. Carmen had created a medical intelligence profile system that enabled the reconnaissance team to identify 37 high-value targets without conducting a single traditional interrogation. But her innovation went beyond target identification. Carmen had recognized that medical assistance could serve as both intelligence-gathering tool and psychological operation. By providing genuine medical treatment to families connected to insurgent activities, she had created opportunities for voluntary intelligence sharing that proved far more effective than coercive interrogation techniques. Elena read testimonials from special operations commanders who credited Carmen's medical intelligence methodology with enabling successful raids that captured key insurgent leaders while minimizing civilian casualties. The technique had been so successful that it became standard procedure for reconnaissance operations in urban environments where traditional intelligence gathering posed unacceptable risks to American personnel. The second major revelation concerned Operation Desert Rose, a counter-terrorism mission in Syria that had required identifying terrorist recruitment networks operating within refugee populations. Traditional intelligence analysis had failed because terrorist organizations had adapted their operational security to avoid detection through conventional surveillance methods. Carmen's breakthrough came through analyzing patterns of family separation and reunification within refugee camps. Terrorist recruiters specifically targeted young men who had been separated from their families during the chaos of civil war, offering false promises of reunion in exchange for participation in terrorist activities. By tracking family separation data against recruitment timelines, Carmen had identified the specific methodologies used by terrorist organizations to identify and exploit vulnerable individuals. Her analysis had enabled American forces to disrupt 3 separate recruitment networks that were responsible for training dozens of individuals who subsequently carried out terrorist attacks across Europe and the Middle East. The operation had prevented an estimated 47 terrorist attacks, saving hundreds of civilian lives across multiple countries. Elena discovered that her mother's analytical reports had been personally reviewed by the National Security Council and had directly influenced American counterterrorism strategy in Syria and surrounding regions. Carmen's insights about terrorist recruitment methodologies had been incorporated into training programs for intelligence officers working in refugee populations worldwide. The third revelation was the most personal. Among Carmen's classified documents, Elena found a letter addressed to her daughter, written during her final deployment, but never sent. The letter revealed the emotional cost of maintaining operational security, even within her own family. The constant fear that her classified service would endanger her daughter's safety, and the hope that Elena would someday understand the significance of her mother's contributions to American national security. "My dearest Elena," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means that circumstances have required the revelation of my service with the 77th Reconnaissance Battalion. I have never spoken about this work because operational security demanded absolute discretion, even from the people I love most. But I want you to understand that every mission, every deployment, every moment away from you was motivated by the desire to make the world safer for the next generation of Americans. The letter continued with detailed explanations of Carmen's analytical methodology, her approach to cultural intelligence gathering, and her belief that the most effective intelligence work required understanding human nature rather than simply technical surveillance capabilities. Carmen had written extensively about her hope that Alina would pursue her own path in life, rather than feeling obligated to continue her mother's military service. But the final paragraph revealed Carmen's recognition that Alina possessed the same analytical intuition that had made her mother valuable to classified operations. I have watched you analyze problems with the same systematic approach that enables effective intelligence work. If you choose to serve your country in similar capacity, remember that the most important intelligence comes from understanding people rather than technology. Cultural sensitivity, linguistic capability, and human empathy are weapons that can prevent wars rather than simply winning them. Alina realized that her years of academic preparation, her focus on Middle Eastern studies, her systematic approach to problem solving, and her dedication to understanding complex cultural dynamics had been unconsciously guided by genetic inheritance of her mother's analytical framework. She hadn't chosen intelligence work. It had chosen her through the same cognitive patterns that had made Carmen Vasquez legendary within the classified community. The package included one final document, Alina's new assignment orders for the Joint Intelligence Operations Center at MacDill Air Force Base, but these weren't standard intelligence assignments. Alina was being assigned to the Cultural Intelligence Analysis Division, a specialized unit that conducted the same type of work that had made her mother invaluable to the 77th Reconnaissance Battalion. Her first mission briefing was scheduled for the following Monday. The target, a terrorist recruitment network operating within American university systems, using social media platforms and cultural organizations to identify potential recruits for international terrorist activities. The mission would require exactly the kind of cultural analysis and systematic intelligence evaluation that had characterized her mother's service with classified operations. Alina carefully returned her mother's classified documents to their secure container, understanding that she was no longer simply wearing dog tags as a memorial to her mother's service. She was carrying forward a legacy of intelligence work that had protected American lives for over a decade, and would now continue through her own contributions to national security. The quiet girl with the ghost nickname had discovered that she wasn't just following in her mother's footsteps. She was continuing a family tradition of service that operated in the shadows, protecting American interests through intelligence work that could never be publicly acknowledged, but which formed at the foundation of national security in an increasingly dangerous world. 6 months after Alina's arrival at MacDill Air Force Base, the quiet girl with the ghost nickname had become something else entirely. Lieutenant Alina Vasquez, Cultural Intelligence Analysis Division, had successfully identified and dismantled the terrorist recruitment network that had been operating within American university systems for over 2 years. Her analysis had led to 17 arrests across 6 states, prevented what intelligence assessments indicated would have been 3 separate domestic terrorist attacks, and earned her a classified commendation that would never appear in any public record. But more significantly, Alina had discovered something about herself that transcended professional achievement. She wasn't simply continuing her mother's work. She was evolving it. Where Carmen had relied primarily on field observation and cultural intuition, Alina had developed systematic methodologies that combined statistical analysis with deep cultural understanding, creating intelligence assessment tools that were being adopted throughout the Special Operations Command intelligence community. Her breakthrough had come through recognizing that modern terrorist recruitment operated like viral marketing campaigns, using social media algorithms and cultural identity triggers to identify vulnerable individuals within specific demographic groups. Traditional intelligence analysis focused on monitoring known terrorist communications, but Alina had realized that recruitment networks were hiding in plain sight within legitimate cultural and academic organizations. By analyzing patterns of social media engagement, academic club participation, and international student exchanges, Alina had identified the specific recruitment methodology being used to target American university students. The terrorist organization had been using legitimate cultural organizations as cover, hosting academic conferences and cultural events that served as screening mechanisms for potential recruits. Alina's analysis had enabled law enforcement to conduct coordinated operations that captured not just individual recruits, but the entire network infrastructure, including financial supporters, communication specialists, and operational coordinators. The success had earned her recognition from Admiral Caldwell, who had personally reviewed her intelligence assessments and recommended her for advancement within the classified intelligence community. The transformation in how others perceived Alina had been gradual but unmistakable. Lieutenant Commander Reed, who had dismissed her during their Advanced Tactical Intelligence Program training, had visited MacDill as part of a joint intelligence briefing. When he learned that the quiet candidate he'd relegated to research and documentation had become one of Special Operations Command's most valuable intelligence analysts, his reaction had been a mixture of embarrassment and professional respect. "Alina," Reed had said during their brief encounter at the Base Officers Club, "I owe you an apology. I completely misjudged your capabilities during our training. Your work here at MacDill is being discussed at the highest levels of naval intelligence. I was wrong about your potential for collaborative operations." Alina had accepted his apology with the same quiet dignity that had characterized her response to mockery throughout her military career. But privately, she understood that Reed's initial assessment hadn't been entirely incorrect. She did prefer individual analysis to group dynamics, and she did work most effectively when given independence to pursue analytical insights without having to negotiate consensus among multiple personalities. The difference was that Alina had found her proper operational environment. Cultural intelligence analysis required exactly the kind of systematic, independent thinking that had made her seem antisocial during conventional military training. In the classified world of counterterrorism operations, her analytical approach wasn't a liability. It was her greatest professional asset. Alina's reputation within the intelligence community had grown through word of mouth, recommendations from operational commanders who had seen their mission success rates improve dramatically when Alina's cultural analysis informed their planning processes. She had developed specialized expertise in terrorist recruitment psychology, social media intelligence gathering, and cultural identity exploitation techniques that were being requested for operations across multiple theaters of conflict. But the most meaningful recognition had come from an unexpected source. 3 weeks earlier, Alina had received a personal letter from Dr. Fatima al-Rashid, a Syrian refugee whose family had been saved by intelligence gathered during her mother's Operation Desert Rose 7 years earlier. Dr. al-Rashid had spent years trying to identify the American intelligence officer whose work had enabled her family's rescue from terrorist recruitment networks, and had finally been connected to Alina through diplomatic channels. "Your mother saved my family," Dr. al-Rashid had written. "Her intelligence work enabled American forces to identify the terrorist organization that had kidnapped my brother and threatened my children. Because of her analysis, my family was evacuated to safety, and we were able to build new lives in America. Now my son is studying engineering at MIT, and my daughter is pursuing medical school. Your mother's service gave my children the opportunity to contribute to American society, rather than becoming victims of terrorist exploitation." Elena had read the letter multiple times, finally understanding the human impact of the classified intelligence work that had defined her mother's career and was now shaping her own. The statistical successes, the operational achievements, and the professional recognition were important, but the knowledge that her family's service had directly protected innocent people provided a deeper sense of purpose than any military commendation could offer. Standing in her office at MacDill Air Force Base, Elena looked out at the training facilities where special operations forces prepared for missions that would take them to the world's most dangerous locations. Many of those missions would be informed by intelligence analysis that she would provide, cultural assessments that could mean the difference between mission success and American casualties. Elena touched the dog tags that she still wore beneath her uniform, but their significance had evolved far beyond personal memorial. They represented a family tradition of service that operated in the shadows, protecting American interests through intelligence work that required sacrificing personal recognition for national security. Carmen Vasquez's legacy lived on through her daughter's contributions to operations that would never be publicly acknowledged, but which formed the foundation of American safety in an increasingly dangerous world. The nickname Ghost had taken on new meaning within the classified intelligence community. Elena moved through complex cultural landscapes with the same invisible precision that had once made her seem antisocial to her peers. But now that ability to operate undetected, to analyze human behavior without being noticed, to understand cultural dynamics that others missed, had made her invaluable to operations where visibility meant failure and analytical accuracy meant the difference between life and death. Elena's phone buzzed with an encrypted message containing her next assignment, a terrorist financing network operating through international academic exchanges between American universities and Middle Eastern institutions. The mission would require the same cultural analysis and systematic intelligence evaluation that had made her mother legendary within the 77th Reconnaissance Battalion. As Elena began reading the classified briefing materials, she realized that her journey from the quiet girl mocked for her ghost nickname to one of America's most effective intelligence analysts represented something larger than personal achievement. She was continuing a family legacy that proved the most powerful weapons in America's arsenal weren't always the loudest or most visible. Sometimes the most important battles were fought by people whose names would never appear in history books, whose achievements would remain classified long after their deaths, but whose quiet service protected the freedom that allowed others to live without fear. Elena Vasquez had discovered that honor didn't need to be loud, recognition didn't need to be public, and the greatest contributions to American security came from those who served in the shadows with unwavering dedication to protecting the innocent. Ghost had found her calling, and America was safer because of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.